All right, welcome. So this is Student-Led Civics Projects 101. It's being run by Generation Citizen, and it is part of Rhode Island Civic Learning Week. So Rhode Island Civic Learning Week. This is the first time we've done this in Rhode Island. There's concurrent Civic Learning Weeks happening in Massachusetts and New York. And this year's theme is building communities through civics. And the idea is that to confront pressing issues, combat political polarization, and the loss of trust in democratic institutions, we're really like gathering together through sessions this week to think about what rural civic learning could help bridge these divides. The Civic Learning Week is being sponsored by the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition. Can we get the next slide? All right, the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition is a multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multi-generational coalition committed to ensuring that all Rhode Islanders, including young people and those most marginalized from our democratic system, have equitable access to high-quality civic learning opportunities. And to help make sure that this week happens, Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition was supported by co-hosts, which include the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, the Rhode Island Department of State, and Rhode Island Department of Education. And without further ado, let's introduce our facilitators, which includes me. I'm Alicia Roth. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a program manager with Generation Citizen New England. I was a former teacher, a civics teacher, and I also have worked in workforce development in the past. And let me introduce my co-facilitator today, Kara.
Hi everyone, my name is Kara Fraker. I also take she, her, and hers pronouns. I'm a senior program manager at GC New England with Alicia. It's been 4 years now. And before joining the team, I taught at Framingham High School in Massachusetts. So my background is in the classroom.
Right. So today we have an essential question that we will keep revisiting to help anchor us throughout the presentation. And that question has two parts to it, really. One part is what excites you about this kind of student-led civics project. And on the flip side, what concerns, fears, or cautions does it bring up for you? And so we are going to use Jamboard throughout the session to kind of keep track of that. You can either be writing this down in a notebook and add it to Jamboard at places where we take pauses, or you can open up this Jamboard now and just use it as is throughout the meeting. So there are kind of three sort of columns, right, if you will, on this Jamboard. We have excitements, cautions, questions, fears, concerns. Let's make this actually say excitements. That would have bugged me. All right, so Kara is demonstrating for us on the screen here how you use Jamboard. You can add sticky notes using that little tab in the middle that looks kind of like a sticky note pad. And when you save that, it'll show up on the board and you can move it around. So that's one of our interactive tools we'll be using today. All right, and without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Kara.
All right, thanks, Alicia. Let me dive back in here. All right. So Action Civics is Generation Citizen's bread and butter, and it is a best practice in student-led civics projects. So this is on the right here, you see our advocacy hourglass. This is our framework for any kind of student-led civics project. And we sort of use these two terms, action civics and student-led civics, Civics projects interchangeably, say both today. And we'll take some time to dive into the details of the advocacy hourglass soon. But this is a student-facing tool. This is our framework for any kind of project that starts in the community and includes a systemic policy goal where students are actually making change on behalf of themselves and others. And the reason we're all here today is complex, but it's exciting that we have an opportunity. So I think it's probably clear to all of us that we as a democracy struggle to get folks involved. And voting is just the tip of the iceberg, but we have some pretty devastating statistics about eligible voters who don't participate in elections. We don't really have a democracy unless people participate. So we are on a mission to try to change that. And then when it comes to civics education, it's often ineffective. Rote memorization about how government works is not something that's going to inspire people to get involved in government and in civic engagement. So even when it does exist, it's often dry. We know that students test worse in civics and history than any other subject, unfortunately, at least in the past. And when it does exist, it is often unequal and unequitable. Students of color are a lot more likely to experience really fact-based instruction and not have opportunities to exercise their power and exercise their voices in their communities. So we're working to address all of these things at Generation Citizen, and we hope that you are too. So with Action Civics, there are really 5 stages, 5 steps, if you will, and they're enumerated here on the left. Pick an issue in really profound ways, not just Googling it and finding some articles, but really getting in on the ground and finding out as much as you can about it from the people who are living the issue. Making an informed plan from that research, taking action, and then accomplish what you learned, and maybe some ideas about who you are and your democracy. And this process is really defined by 4 things. It is student-led. Teachers are facilitating, they're mentoring, they're guiding, they're helping students troubleshoot, they're meeting learning needs, but they're letting students make the critical decisions about the direction of the projects. It has to do with real world personal issues. Those can be as small as wanting to change some sort of school policy or as broad as working on state legislation. We're working on here, really systemic change and reflecting on impact and approach. What would we do differently next time if we could do it again? And when we think about the impact, we're really thinking about it on 3 different levels. So in our approach, students work to build for one project in one class. So the entire class is working on the same project after coming to consensus on the thing that they care about the most. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we really believe in this value of consensus because, especially in the humanities, debate is emphasized constantly, and our students develop these skills really well. Coming to consensus is a completely different skill. And frankly, at least personally, I think it's one we could see more of in the world. And for teachers, we provide training, coaching, and resource on an ongoing basis for teachers to help them really practice some reflection in their facilitation of these projects. Really thinking about project-based learning and how to create a democratic classroom and student voice. And then for the community, we really love to talk about breaking down the 4 walls, of the classroom in the pursuit of these projects, right? It starts in the classroom. It starts in maybe a more traditional lesson structure that students might be used to, but by the end, they are reaching out to real people. Real people are coming into the classrooms. They're making asks of the people who have the power to make change. And it's a beautiful way to build relationships within the school and the community. And also in terms of outcomes, we like to talk about it in terms of 3 categories: civic knowledge, civic skills, and civic motivation. Obviously, students need to have a certain amount of civic knowledge to make the projects work. But more importantly, they're developing real world skills, professional skills in making the work happen. And most critically, and the thing that really excites me about the work that we do is this sense of civic motivation or civic disposition. If I don't believe that I can be a change maker or that I have a role in our democracy, it doesn't matter if I have all the skills in the world. If I don't have that critical belief that I am important and I know that I can exercise my voice and make a change if I want to. Okay, so we are going to make a word cloud now. It's sort of like a thought exercise. We want you to imagine you walk into a classroom full of highly engaged, motivated students working on a student-led civics project. What words or phrases would you use to describe what you see, hear, and feel? And to make this word cloud, you can either scan the QR code on your screen, or you can click the link that Alicia has dropped in the chat. Thank you, Alicia. And I'm going to hop over here so we can watch it come to life. I'm sorry, my dog is scratching at the door incessantly, so I'm going to let her in so that she will stop. Speaking of pets in life joining us on screen. What does a classroom full of highly engaged, motivated students working on a project like this look, sound, and feel? What do you notice in that room? Community, love that. Collaboration, community, loud, giddy, definitely giddy and nervous sometimes too. I've watched a kid pick up a phone to call an elected official. Staff picks up the phone and says hello. They panic and throw the phone across the room. You know, you never know what you're going to get out of our students sometimes. Energized, amazing, high energy, busy, definitely controlled chaos for sure. Productive, collaborative, controlled chaos. Yeah, it's never dull. It's never boring. It's always invigorating. And it's pretty wonderful. All right, we'll hop back in here.
All right, so I switched over to phone audio because I have an unstable connection. Is my voice clear? Okay, all right, great, thank you. All right, so we're going to take a pause. We can go back to that Jamboard and just like take a minute to think about, based on what Kara just said, what is exciting, what cautions or questions come up for you, or do you think might come up for a teacher if you are not currently a middle school or high school teacher, and what like fears or concerns might a classroom teacher have? All right, we can keep using that as we go along. You can kind of use this sort of as our pre-assessment, right? What do we know now? And what are we thinking about now? And then when we come back to it at different stages, you can see if any of this has shifted for you, if any of these questions have changed or been answered, if there's something new exciting or something new concerning, and we'll come back to it for our discussion at the end. And you can keep using this throughout the webinar. All right. So we are going to, I skipped something. All right, so first, before we get into our hourglass, we are going to hear a teacher perspective on what it was like to get introduced to GC and start implementing it in her classroom. Melanie Seamus is a Central Falls High School special educator, and she's taught GC Action Civics for many years.
I didn't know what to expect because I hadn't really done it before. So I was like, okay, how does this work? Going through the process, learning from the GC, helping along with that. I wasn't really sure what to expect. Really, I'm like, okay, student led. What does that mean? Like normally, like the teacher leads everything. Now, though, I feel much more comfortable. I've done this, 10 times I think at this point. So it's much more comfortable. You still have those like apprehensions depending on the class. Some classes need more guidance than others, but you just have to have confidence that the students can do it, and they always step up.
All right, so the first two rungs of our advocacy hourglass are community issues and focus issue. And the main thing here is like two parts. Establishing a democratic classroom culture that's excited about the project, and also surfacing issues that are important to the community at large, helping them figure out what matters to their community, what issues there are in a community, and narrowing down to which issues are most important to the collective community of that particular classroom, right? And so when they're researching these community issues and trying to see what bubbles up, they might look at the media, they might bring in their own observations, and one of the assignments as part of GC is to have students interview members of their community, which include the students in their classroom, the students in their school, their parents, their family members, and if they're brave enough, talking to strangers, which, if they're in 8th grade, often they aren't brave enough, but some of them are very eager. And so this first step is really just like establishing the idea that we're going to work on a project and we're going to make a decision together. So what are the possible issues? The next step is narrowing down to a particular focus issue. And for this, what GC offers for consensus building is a continuum, right? So you want to ideally have 2 to 3 issues that students are excited about, or a good deal of students are excited about, and then you go through different of tackling, just building consensus on one issue at a time. And this is really hard for a lot of students because they're so used to debating. They want to pit one issue against the other. I actually saw this in a classroom a few weeks ago when they shifted from talking about homelessness to talking about, I think, drug abuse. There was a student who went from the I'm excited to here's how I would need this to be amended end of the continuum. Every time she talked, she was talking about the previous end. She wanted to debate it. It was like they needed to be pitted against each other. So it's really important for teachers at this point to bring students back to the process. We are looking at just this issue right now. And if we were to tackle this issue as a whole class, what would you need us to do to get you on board, to make it so that you can go along, right? And that's ideally, if you've got students who can go along with this issue because they might not be super excited about it, but they can go along, that is consensus, especially when you're trying to get a whole class on board, right? And we really value at GC having a whole class project as opposed to having individual group projects, multiple group projects or individual projects in the classroom. All right, and so let's think about what this feels like, right? Because this is probably really different than what a lot of students and teachers in the classroom. This is Darren. He's a 2-time Action Civics student, and he's a Coalition Youth Fellow for the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition, and he's going to reflect on the consensus building process.
The consensus building process was probably the most interesting part of doing the Generation Citizen curriculum for me, just because each student or different groups to do a different issue. And if you're really lucky, you have a lot of passion around each of those issues. Then you have to take all of that passion and meld it into a single issue for your single project. And it's definitely very different from the things you usually do in class. A lot of times teachers will like let you decide what kind of project, not necessarily what kind of project you want to do, but like what specifically you want to do your project on. And if it's a class thing, maybe they'll do it by a straight majority vote, but I've never done a consensus-based project in a class outside of it. And it's, again, very interesting because you really have to talk to your classmates and convince them or take their ideas either into this one issue, this one project, and convince them that this is the way to go, and that in doing this project, you have brought enough of their passion into it, enough of their issue into it for them to want to support that specific project. And both times that I've done it, it has led us to issues or ideas that we wanted to support within our project that we had never thought about before. And it was all because we had to get every member of our class on board with that project. So without that, I don't think either of the projects that I've had a part in would have been nearly as good or impactful as they were. The input of my entire class. All of my classmates, some of them very stubborn if they wanted to be about their issue. But because of that, you really get to know your classmates better, and you also get to the best project that you can.
All right. And now we will hear from Melanie again to hear it from the teacher side.
Going through the process to pick focus can be a tough one because sometimes you have a million ideas and you're going through the process and they're like, okay, how do we narrow this down? Sometimes like, it's a consensus process. You have to actually, because you have so many ideas, you actually have to start voting first before you can actually build consensus to narrow it down. But sometimes you have kids, I don't know. So that I still think it can be a challenge. Is one, if students aren't sure, when they're picking something that you think might not have, like they can make an impact. So they're picking something that, yes, is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed, but how can they, in the course of a semester or however much time you have, can they actually make some change or go through the, because you don't want them to be, you want them to go through the process. You don't want them to be like severely disappointed either. So it's like going in between that. And it's, what surprises you really about it is that like that the students every semester, sometimes you get similar topics. Like I would have never even thought of that as a teacher. That was an issue. So it's really interesting to see the different group dynamics and what they come up with. Can surprise you every semester.
All right. So now that we've talked a bit about consensus, and we can, as we're moving through our hourglass, we've landed on a focus issue. Hypothetically, the next thing to think about is what are some of the root causes of this issue? And you can see that the hourglass is still narrowing at this point, right? We're still drilling down, we're getting more and more specific about what we want to be thinking about. And so when we talk about root cause, we are all familiar with this old adage, give a man a fish and for a day, teach a man to fish and I'll eat for a lifetime. Lovely sentiment. But teaching someone to fish presumes they have access to a lake and that the lake hasn't been fished out and that the industrial waste hasn't poisoned all of the fish. This is what we mean when we talk about root cause, right? There might be more issues behind this person becoming self-sufficient other than learning how to fish, and really helping students start to see the systemic reasons why problems and issues might exist in the first place. And often the topics that students choose, because they are, challenges and issues in the community, they have multiple root causes. There are lots of contributing factors that make that problem exist. And so the purpose looking at them all is to sort of see, okay, well, what's one that we think we can do something about, that we can actually develop a goal to change, especially, for example, an issue like homelessness. Homelessness has so many root causes in a community, and students will never be able to fix the entire problem in one semester, but where can they move the needle? Where can they make a bit of change that improves the lives of community members and the health of the community overall? And so to do that, we have to teach students about systems, which especially for younger students, 8th graders, middle schoolers generally, endeavor. But we really help them think about what are maybe the individual choices that contribute to a problem. You can't really change the way individual people behave, so we're going to set those aside. We can look at the systems level. We can think about the systems that govern our everyday lives that we interact with every day. And that's really where we can make sweeping change that's going to impact most people. So this little blurry slide is because it comes directly from our curriculum. So we just try to find a way to get it in here. This is how we help students understand what root cause is. So we give a very straightforward example for them. Let's say the issue is a student is always late to class. There are plenty of individual choices that might contribute to that, right? She forgets to set her alarm. She stays up too late watching TV. There are individual choices that can make that a problem. Or maybe they're at the systemic level. Maybe school starts too early for teenagers who need more time in the morning for their brains to warm up. Maybe there aren't enough buses on her bus route, and so she's always late to class because the bus isn't consistent. Or maybe there's just a lack of public transportation in her neighborhood, period, and she struggles every day to make it to school on time. And so to really focus on what are the root causes of our issue and what are some possible systemic policy goals that we can choose to make a difference, we ask students to engage with something called participatory action research, or PAR. And PAR is different than typical research. It does include some components that look like maybe traditional research, finding local articles, local news sources about the issue, using library resources, the internet, that kind of thing. But more importantly, PAR asks students to go to the individuals who are directly impacted by the issue, or maybe already working to fix the issue. So conducting surveys and interviews of just regular folks in the community who have their own opinions on this issue or have engaged with the issue in different ways. Talking to community experts who are already working on it. Maybe there is a local advocacy group that's already focused on substance abuse in the community, or maybe there's someone from the local homeless shelter who can tell us more about what this issue, how it manifests specifically here in our community, as opposed to in the US writ large. And then reaching out to legislators as well and other government officials to say, hey, is there anything already in the works here? Like, who is working on this? What is already being done? Where are there gaps in what's already happening on the ground? And with this complete sort of picture, what it really does is it helps students zoom in on how the issue manifests in their community and not just generally speaking with a bunch of statistics about the nation as a whole. And so once they've done their participatory action research and they've identified a root cause that they think they can work with, they develop a goal out of that root cause. And at Generation Citizen, we ask students to either think about that goal as being at the school district level, so changing some sort of school or district policy, the city level, maybe introducing a new ordinance or asking that there be more money put towards something in the budget, or at the state level, working with their state legislators to work on something at that level. We do not recommend that students do it at the federal level. It's it's just impossible. It's too hard. It's too hard to get FaceTime with anybody. It's too hard to go up against lobbyists. They won't see the fruits of their labor. And change takes so much longer at the federal level than it does at the local level. So we just have them stay away. And then in terms of the branch of government, we're talking legislative or executive, because we don't have the time or the money to sue anybody. So we're just not even gonna go there. All right, and now we'll hear from Melanie again about what this section of the hourglass is like for her and what it's like to really help all learners take the lead during research and beyond.
Versus now.
Yeah, having the students lead and own can be at first for a teacher like, what am I doing? But yeah, so at first I was like, all right, how am I going to do this while still giving them like the guidance they need, but also making sure that they're taking ownership. So that was definitely something at first I wasn't like sure what to do. Asking for help from GC with that definitely, helped me do that. But now it's still weird, definitely, to give them, but it's definitely more comfortable. It's just explaining to a new group, when it's time to like, all right, you're going to look up some articles yourself. How do we find articles? The guiding stuff that GC gives really helps. Or even like, we're going to call someone. How do we do that? We're going to email something. They oftentimes are like, but can you just email it for me? Or can you write me email? It's like, no, you're going to use the guide and we're going to do this. If I can obviously point you in the right direction of people you can contact. So that's kind of what I do. Point them who they can contact in that direction if they're not sure, but then have them take the ownership of doing everything else themselves. So there's still some guiding.
Do you have any tips for teachers who either teach special ed or, all teachers have students with IEPs in their classes, inclusion teachers, whatever. Do you have any tips or suggestions or guidance where special education students are concerned in these projects?
So special education students, just because they have an IEP or a 514 does not mean they can't do this stuff. They just might need things broken down a little more. So for example, if they're doing, one of the classroom constitution, for example, and they're like, I don't know what to do. Like, how do I do this? Like maybe give them their sentence starters for that and to break it down, give them examples. But I know I teach, so I have inclusion students and I have students that I just teach special education. So it's all special ed students in one class. For those students, I actually slow down the pace as well. So we would do it in a full year versus a semester. So they can, because extended time is one of the big things for a lot of students. So we're just slowing down the pace for them because they just need more time processing. But for inclusion students, definitely like charts and which some of the stuff is actually provided by GC, like the MLL guidance actually helps for special ed students as well. So definitely use those. But it's really about, you don't have to follow the lessons to it. Oh my God, I have to do this now. It has to take 5 minutes. No, it doesn't. If your class at the time needs more than 5 minutes, it's okay, and give them the time that they need. When it comes to like the action civics part, that can be a little more challenging for any students with special needs. So making sure there's those scaffolding in place, so that action research kit toolkit is something that they have, and they do have sample letters and stuff like that. One time I actually modeled how to write an email with the class, and that worked really well. So doing stuff like modeling will help them too, and actually modeling will help any student. So it's just a good strategy in general.
Versus now.
All right. One thing that she said in there really resonated with me, and I was thinking back to my own experience teaching action civics. And she was like, just because the curriculum says something should take 5 minutes doesn't mean it should. And I distinctly remember me and my co-teacher watching these kids like not have a discussion for like 10 minutes. And we're like, they only have 5 minutes left. And then we were like, they started talking and we were like, all right, let's give them 10 more minutes, right? Because the first 10 minutes were just them warming up to having the discussion. And so it's really important to just like pay attention to what the kids need, because sometimes they just need a little more time to percolate. Okay, and with that, they've done their root cause research and they've identified their goal. And actually, during this next sort of action phase where it says targets and tactics, students are planning their action and taking action. They're going to go back to the research that they identified, right? And they're going to think about who can press on policymakers for us, who are the influencers, who are the decision makers, and what's the best way to push them, right? And so that's the action planning phase. And it tends to get, I think, kind of more muddy here. Like we talk about these as their separate phases, but students might need to go back and do more research. And there might be some students that are going ahead and moving forward with taking some action steps, because maybe your guest speaker is one of your influencers and you want to start leveraging them immediately. And we recommend having more than one type of action for each project group. So let's go and look at what informed civic action looks like. So we've got target, tactics chosen, group members, and goal for class today. So ideally, if you walk into an Action Civics classroom, you are going to see different groups of students working on different sorts of things, right? And so we have here as our first target, City Councilman Jesse Reagan, and students are going to send them an email letter and invite them to a meeting. And their goal for today towards that strategy is get feedback on our letter draft and email it. And ideally, you have that group of students like working on more than one tactic, so that if they're waiting for feedback, because all teachers have been there where students say, I'm done with the thing you had me do. What's next, right? Like, so in project-based learning, you really have to have them set up with some next steps so that they know what to do while they're waiting for you to get back to them or waiting for somebody to email them back. All right, and our tactics, we kind of scaffold this into 3 buckets for students and have a tactic toolkit that helps scaffold each bunch of different strategies in these buckets. So one bucket is on this one leg of this stool is develop your argument. And that includes things like compiling research, taking all that PAR research and turning it into a video or a presentation, a report, an infographic, something that can be used while students are taking action. One leg of the stool is lobbying decision makers, and one leg of the stool is rallying support. And while these are 3 different legs of the stool, this is one stool, and they support each other, and students who are in different groups should be connecting with other groups to say, I've done this. This is what I'm handing off to you for the next step. And they're really working on this project all together. All right, and that is taking action. So from Melanie's perspective, she's going to offer like what it's like to take a step back while students are taking action, and really what it's like to enjoy the process rather focusing on some predetermined outcome.
In the action phase, like more independence, but even with regular, you know, I'm teaching US history or in the beginning of civics before we do Generation Citizen, I definitely give them time to do independent, you know, work independently. And, you know, when you need help, I am here. Like, you got to ask for help. So trying to get them to self-advocate. So for all those things. So that is definitely similar to teaching normally, because I want them as high school students, I teach high school, like they, as they get older, they need to be able to advocate for themselves. So making sure, taking that step back. And like, here are the things you need help, but you got to come to me, and I can help you, but you need to voice it. Don't like get like so bogged down and nervous. I think like the first time it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. How is this gonna work? You know, take the advice that everybody gives you and make it your own. Is really like the thing. The students all the time, they will always surprise you. Like, and you can see they're like, oh my God, I get it. This is great. So just like going with that flow, sometimes, you know, depending on the group, you're going to have different, every time you do this project, it's going to be different because of the personalities you have. So it's really just, you know, taking all those things in. I think oftentimes, you know, teachers like, I need to get through this. It's not about getting through it. It's about the process. So if those kids are learning the process, that's what's the most important thing, even if you don't get to the end. That was like the thing. Oh my God, we need to get to the end. No, you don't need to get to the end. You just need to, they need to understand the process and see like how that process works.
I love that. I've got to get to the end. No, you don't. Like, kids are going to learn about the process through trying it. And one thing that I like to say to my students, because I still volunteer at school, is like, social movements are about failing over and over and over again until something gets some traction, right? So the fact that you're trying, if you don't have an outcome the first time, then you are just lock in step with every mover, maker, and shaker that we've learned about in our history books. And so going back to that question we asked in the beginning, what does a group of students who are super motivated and super engaged, what does that classroom look, sound, and feel like? And so we're going to show you a video of a group of students who are in the middle of action phase, I think. And the sound isn't super great, but I want you to be thinking about that feel, look, sound factor.
21st century understanding of civics.
Civics is just the study of learning how to be a citizen. So not just learning about government, but learning how to engage in it.
3 years ago, prior to the enactment of this new law, 8th graders at the Pine Arts Magnet School in Lowell piloted a curriculum that introduced real-world civics projects as a part of their social studies class. Teams of students are currently hard at work advocating for bills in the House and the Senate, as well as filing their own bill, all related to issues surrounding vaping use by teens.
For civics education, we want students to engage in the real world. So rather than just open the textbooks up and read about people engaging in civics, we want students to actually get out there and do it.
We wanted to stop the amount of teens that actually started the vaping, because vaping is very bad for you.
The kids go through a process of identifying community issues, they conduct interviews, and then we build consensus around one real world issue.
What I found most interesting about our project was seeing so many kids come together and decide on one topic.
And then we go through a process of conducting research, we have guest speakers come in, and we try to figure out how can we impact that issue. One of the classes was working with Representative Nangle to draft legislation regarding flavored tobacco products.
For our goal, it was to change flavor restrictions to adult-only stores. So we like establishments that like sell food, you can't sell flavored vaping products in there anymore. Lowell already passed this, so we want to make it a statewide law.
One of the classes decided to work on an existing bill that's been sitting in the Ways and Means Committee for about a year that would add additional taxes to vaping products.
None of the money is going to prevention programs, meaning that schools don't really get the right education for their students to stop this epidemic from happening.
They have real responsibility. So it's not just opening up the textbook and reading about other people. They're getting on the phone with elected officials.
We're asking for a floor vote for House Bill 3998 and not relative to the taxation of electronic smoking devices.
They're coming up with strategies. They're coming up with goals. They're talking to community members about what kind of bills exist, or what kind of bill can we write.
I feel like the coolest thing about this project was that we had
had the ability to reach out to so many people at once, because we called all 35 members of the Ways and Means Committee.
The students made all the phone calls. We had a call script that we created together. And we then followed up with emails. We created an email script and the students followed up with that. Yasmin, you had Representative Stanley, right? You had contacted him and he had emailed back with us. It's important to show students that they have the opportunity to actually not, rather than just sit back and complain about things, to actually get out there and have an impact themselves.
Teenagers actually can make a change in the world.
If you're ready to make your phone call, please raise your hand. So they're saying that they can actually have an impact and that people take them seriously. So even though these students are in 8th grade, they're getting out there and doing real things.
It makes me feel really inspired, because before we didn't really know that adults would listen to us as much as they do.
If we don't engage in our process, then we don't really have a democracy. Democracy, you know, the definition of democracy is ruled by the people. So if we're not engaging in it, we don't have a democracy.
All right. So a couple of learnings from that video that I just want to like elevate, right? Is like, you know, granted there's a reporter there, but like he has the attention of his class, right? Like they're paying attention, they're engaging together, and they wrote a bill. Like I can't tell you, like I have had conversations where teachers have said, I don't know how this is going to get done. Well, part of it has to do with one, what Melanie said, not worrying so much about whether or not you get it done, but also trusting the kids, as she said, because as we see time and time again, kids really step up to the plate and they do some pretty powerful stuff. Okay, so let's revisit our Jamboard and see if there are any fears or concerns that have been alleviated, or new ones that have come up, or new things that people are excited about. And people can actually feel free to like unmute if you have a question that you'd like to elevate, or an excitement you'd like to share. So looking at this, we've got a couple of questions. So how do you help English learners keep up with the class and feel included?
That's a great question. If you have GC, if you partner with GC, we have a really extensive MLO, multilingual learner guide and accommodations for those students. But the shorter answer is, you know, the beauty of project-based learning means that students have opportunities to get involved, not just based on their preferences, but with the parts of the project and with the individuals in the classroom that they naturally gravitate towards. So, you know, if you have an English learner who maybe would really struggle to write a full report about the focus issue, but they want to make a video, that's still just as valid and necessary a product for the advocacy campaign. They still need to have you know, full knowledge of the class's objectives and everything that they're trying to accomplish, and they're still contributing in a critical way. So it really is, project-based learning really does lend itself to an asset framing kind of like, what are the strengths that these students are bringing, even if they are still working on their English proficiency, and how can we leverage those things to make them an essential part of the project.
We have a couple of questions about classroom management, and one thing that I will say from my own experience, because I was a project-based learning teacher, is that it's actually it's counterintuitive, right? Because you think of students doing stuff on their own and you imagine chaos, but because students get so much more engaged in project-based learning work, there is actually even though it might look a little bit chaotic, your classroom management when it comes to managing disruptive behaviors is so much lower. Because often what happens is students who don't feel comfortable being still all class or feel alienated from most classrooms feel empowered and engaged in this kind of learning?
There's a lot
Does
more
anybody
peer
want?
accountability
Oh.
too. Sorry, Alicia. There's a lot more peer accountability too. You know, you're working in a group, you have collective goals. You know, it's really powerful when students are holding themselves accountable to each other instead of you, and that really does bear out. And I'm looking at the question about, you know, this has been a difficult year for student behavior. Absolutely, it has. Students are relearning how to school, and we can't pretend that's not a problem. But there is there's sort of a galvanizing energy around these projects, especially because students weren't able to do things like this last year when they were all remote. We're finding this year that a lot of students are just thrilled to be able to work with each other again in a meaningful way. They missed that social interaction. And especially when you're doing things like bringing, you know, guest speakers into the classroom, there's so much validation that happens over the course of these projects that we really find that, you know, it's not 100%. Of course, you're always going to have folks who are reluctant, but it is, like Alicia was saying, you'll find yourself spending less time thinking about how do I manage the classroom, how do I get students engaged, and more time thinking about how do I wrangle the enthusiasm into productive outcomes, which is a wonderful problem to have.
All right. So questions are totally welcome. You can email Kara and I. And let's skip to our Civics Day video because I just really want to watch that before we close up. So students end their year celebrating their projects and engaging some healthy competition with each other by presenting their Civics Day projects, and people judge them, they give them feedback. That's one essential part of project-based learning, is that students present their projects publicly and they receive feedback. They're evaluated by people who are qualified to evaluate them, and not their, you know, just their peers or something like that, like often happens in a classroom. And so I want to share with you this video. It's a couple of slides ahead of students at a Civics Day event who are talking about why their voice matters.
Good afternoon, Civics Day.
Civics Day is pretty much like coming to the State House and seeing really like everybody's ideas and what they want to change in the communities.
Hi, my name is Justice. I'm a senior at Berkeley High School, and our issue was sexual harassment.
My group focused on vocational skills training programs for the homeless.
My school focused on homework policy installation for their school.
Lunches is something important issue that everyone should be talking about.
Our Generation Citizen project this year was working to save the Berkeley Emergency Storm Shelter, which is typically a temporary shelter that's open in Berkeley and houses about 90 homeless people on any given night.
Hi, my name is Gabriel, and I'm going to take you guys to
My name is Safa Rashid, and I'm in the 8th grade.
My name is Angel Lino, and I'm in 8th grade. I attend the school urban assembly
for wildlife conservation, and we think our voice matters.
My name is Justice Thomas, and I'm a senior, and I believe your voice matters in the best way.
I think my voice matters because I want to bring awareness to people who don't know problems in their community.
What happened in Florida, the school shooting, like it took only a few kids to change the biggest debate in the United States.
This generation needs a lot of innovators and creators and creative people, and just overall, we just need everybody's knowledge.
I have the information. If I have the power to do something, I'm going to do anything that I can to make a difference.
I feel like by me standing up and saying that I actually care about it, it speaks volumes.
Once one student speaks, it can motivate a whole classroom and a whole school. So youth voices are definitely the key to change for the future.
Yay, happy kids. All right, so our last couple of slides are just about how you can reach out to us and get started in Action Civics. So we have a free online PD. It's self-paced. It should take about 4 to 5 hours, and that's Kickstart Action Civics. And there's a huge library of resources when you go through this, and that itself, I think, is worth the time. All right, we'll drop that in the chat. And our last thing is a reminder of our email addresses. They're right here. And we will make sure that we share these resources along with the recording. So thank you all for your time, and please feel free to reach out to Kara or I.
Thank you, everyone.